Okay, in this video we're going to talk about one of the most common things you can do in computer science, and that is parsing file data. Okay, what does the word parse mean? It means to analyze, and in this case we're talking about a string, to analyze a string into its syntactic parts and describe each of those parts' roles. Okay, so fundamentally what we're talking about is organizing data. Okay, if I save some data to a file, there's a certain method that I use to save that data. Alright, and there's lots of different ways to save data to files. Okay, so there are different coding formats or data structuring formats that you may use. And depending on what data format you're using, you're going to have to parse that data differently. Okay, so we're going to learn about one of the most common and simplest data formats to structure data in, and that is the CSV file. The CSV stands for comma separated value. And you'll see files like this have an extension that ends .csv. It stands for comma separated value. And basically the way a file like that looks is, let me pull up an example file. I'll add this to the end of our notes here. This would be an example of one file, and we would call this players.csv, and I'm going back to my Indianapolis Colts players. And you can use any kind of players. You could use, the U.S. women's soccer team or any group of people that you're interested in learning more about. This is just for a demonstration, so I'm using something that I enjoy, right? So here we have a CSV file with 3 players in it. Okay. Now notice comma separated values. That means each value is separated by a comma. So the first value is Luck, the second value is Andrew, the third value is QB. Right, so this is all the stuff we did in the previous assignments with lists and dictionaries. Right, so each line represents one player. Okay, so there's a new line character here. We know that in these files, whenever the text editor moves to another line, there's actually a new line character there. So each of the individual players are separated by a new line character, and then each player has different attributes or values, and each of those values is separated by a comma. Okay, so this is commonly referred to as a CSV file, comma separated values. And there's other ways you can do this. You can use different separators. A lot of times you might see people use tabs to differentiate between the two different values, something like that. Okay, but for our purposes we're going to stick to the basics and do comma separated values. Alright, now if we were to open this file, we learned about file input and output. If we want to open this file and extract this data and store it in a meaningful way in a Python program, this would probably be very good for a dictionary or a list of lists. Okay, so we could do something like that. But first, we need to figure out a way of parsing this data. So this data is just one big string. Okay, so all of these run together, and actually there's just a new line character next, and then this whole line of text, right? And then a new line character, and then that whole line of text. So we need to figure out some way to convert the string data into our structured collections that we've learned about in Python, right? We've learned about lists and dictionaries, and these are collections of data, and they're more structured. I don't want to have to sort through the string to find every single character, right? So what I would like to do is convert all of this into either a list of lists or a list of dictionaries or something like that. So that's what we're going to try to do. So first we need to learn about a special method on a string. So the string method .split. And a method is essentially just a function, but methods usually are attached to objects. Okay, so a string has a dot split on it, right? So some of the functions we've learned about are, the range function, right? We've learned about the open function that opens a file for reading and writing, right? These are functions because they're not attached to any objects. Okay, a method is generally considered to be attached to some sort of object. So this dot split method is attached to strings. All right, so here's an example of how the dot split method works. All right, so let's imagine we have the string that might be a date. All right, and I can call dot split on this. And what this is going to do is I have to specify as the argument what character or characters I want to split over. Now what I'm trying to do is I want to separate this date into 3 pieces. I would like to separate it into the year, the month, and the day. Okay, so if I split over the hyphen character, that's going to do exactly that. This is going to yield me a list of the first item in the list being everything to the left of the first separator character, and then the second item is going to be what was on the right, and then the next item is going to be what was on the right of that. Okay, so basically when you call dot split on a string, whatever delimiter you supply, that is the thing that separates the items. So that will be removed from all of the items in your list. So whenever it sees one of these delimiters, whatever's on the left is the first item, and then whatever's on the right is the next item, and then it looks for another one of those items. Whatever's on the right is the next item in your list. Then it looks for another one. There are no more, so it stops. Okay. Another way you could write this is you could say S equals this string and then say S dot split over the hyphen. Okay, that would yield the same thing. So we'll put that up here, and this yields the same thing. Okay, so this is called a method because we're accessing it on an object. The string the string itself is an object that has extra attributes and extra some of those attributes are functions, so it has extra data attached to it. Okay, so we have a string and then we call the dot split method on it. Okay, and so this dot split, actually the delimiter has to be a hyphen in order for that to work. Okay, so another example of using the split method, if I have a name, May, oops, caps lock, May, comma, Luke, and then I call dot split. If I split over, I'm going to split over 2 characters this time, the comma and the space. This is called the delimiter. It's the thing that separates these items. Okay, so if I look, I see a comma and a space separating these items. So this means this is going to yield a list with 2 items in it. Okay, and then look. Okay, so notice the comma and the space were my delimiter. So the comma and the space do not appear in any of the strings in my list. They are removed, essentially. So basically this string, whatever it is, gets chopped up by the delimiter and a list is created by the pieces left over. So let's try one more. This would be something more like a file. Let's say I opened a file and from our last example we had something like hello, exclamation point, then we have a new line character, how are you, and then a new line character, and then we have I'm great, exclamation point, a new line character. Okay, so this might be something you get from a file. Now I'm going to call split on this, and what's my delimiter? Let's say I want to get every line of that file individually and store each line in a list. So my delimiter would be the new line character. That's the thing that separates each line. So the new line character is here, right? So to the left of that, we would have hello, exclamation point. And then to the right of that, we have how are you. So that would be what goes here. And then we look for our delimiter again, and we see it. And then we have I am great. Now this part is interesting because we see a delimiter again, and what's to the right of it? The empty string. So this would actually be the list that's produced. Okay, so we'd have an extra value here at the end because we had an extra new line, or right here. And if I had two new lines, then I would have two items that were blank at the end. Okay, so let's test this one out. Let's just copy and paste this into Python. So we'll run Python 3 in interactive mode, paste that in there, and we see, sure enough, we have a list. How are you? Notice there's no new lines in any of this, and then because of the two new lines at the end, right here, new line, what's in between that delimiter? An empty string. And then what's on the right side of this delimiter? An empty string. Okay, so that's how the split function works. Okay, and what we're going to do is we're going to use this to parse file data, the file data that looks kind of like this. Okay, so first let's create a file with this information in it, and then we're going to try to open that file. We already know how to do file input and output, and we're going to read that file data. Okay, so we'll exit out of interactive mode. I want to create a file, and I want to say I'm going to echo this first line in there. And then if you want the echo command to execute new line characters, you have to provide it a special option in order for it to print the new line characters. Otherwise it'll actually print the backslash. Alright, and there's a special character or a special option you have to add. So I say echo, and I believe it's -E, and the -E means escape characters. So when we make strings in Python, the backslash means there's an escape character. So in the echo command, you have to specify that. Otherwise, it doesn't allow you to do backslash in, right? It'll just actually think that's a backslash and then the character in. If we add the -E, that's going to print out the new line. Let's just run this and see it prints out this and then the new line. So in Linux, we've learned that we can put this into a file with the greater than symbol, and this is going to go into players.csv, right? Comma separated values. So this should create on my desktop a file. Sure enough, here we go. We can look at it, players.csv, and it has one line of code, or one line of data, and a new line character. So we want to add something else. Okay, so let's look at our notes. What else do we want to add? We're going to add one of these lines. This will be Marlon Mack. And again, as you're doing this, just find something fun that you enjoy or something you want to learn more about, right? I'm using Colts players because I like the Colts. But like I said, you can use anything that you want, just to keep yourself entertained while you learn. All right. So I add another line, my CSV file. Oh, there's a problem because the greater than symbol overwrites any data. So I actually, on that one, I needed to do the double greater than. So I'm going to start over. I'm going to do Andrew Luck first. Okay. And then I go back to Marlon Mack, and now this time I want to append this data. Like that. Alright. Now there's another problem. It's adding spaces in there, which that's not a big deal. We can adjust for that later. Alright. And ideally your program would be able to adjust for that in case they had spaces in their file. Alright. And so the last one we want to add is the T.Y. Hilton. So let's go back to our notes, get that line. Alright, and we'll paste that in there. T.Y. Hilton. And we'll look in our players.csv. Okay, and we've got several lines of code here, right? But we also have some lines that are empty, and we're going to have to handle that. All right, but this is a data file, and this is not uncommon for any computer system to do. The Colts facility has to keep track of their players and how they're doing different things in training camp, and who's getting paid what, and all of this. There's lots of different file formats, and this is one file format. It's a way of organizing data to keep track of things. Okay, so this is actually how spreadsheets originally were designed. Okay, so the basic tenet of a spreadsheet is a grid of cells. So this would be the first cell, and you could have a data value in there, comma, this is the second cell, right? So this is all in the first row, and then this is the fourth cell, fifth cell, sixth cell, and then this is another row. So this CSV file format was originally one of the first things, and you can still use CSV files. You can open this CSV file in a spreadsheet program, and it will read it properly. Let's see if I can do that real quick. Open with LibreOffice. That's a free open source spreadsheet program. Highly recommend. LibreOffice does word processing and everything else. Okay, so basically it automatically detects everything, and it says, what's my separator? I'm using commas. Sometimes you might have a separator that's a tab or a semicolon, but in my case it's commas. And you see, this is an example of what the output's going to look like. These are just the cells in an Excel spreadsheet. Okay. Nowadays, a lot of spreadsheets are much more complicated than this basic file format, but you can still use this basic file format and open it in a spreadsheet program, right? So if I just click OK, I could open that up, and we see in my spreadsheet I have all of these items. Okay, so that's just a fun fact. We're not going to be using the spreadsheet, but it's good to know that you can do that. Alright, so we have this CSV file, and what we want to try to do is we want to make a program. We want to open that CSV file and parse out that data into a usable form for our program. Okay, so let's make a new file, and we're going to call this parse.py. Okay, and what we're going to try to do in this file, like I said, is we're going to open the file. All right, and we're going to learn about importing additional libraries. Okay, additional libraries give you additional tools to use in your computer program. The reason these tools aren't provided by default is because you don't need them in every program, and if they were in every program would be large. All right, so we don't want our programs to be large if they don't need to be large. We have to maintain efficiency, and space efficiency is one of the types of efficiencies. So if our program is large, that means it's big for everyone to download. If we're not using all that information, then why is it in there? Why are we wasting everybody's bandwidth? Okay, so in this case we're going to import a library called OS, and it gives us a bunch of different tools related to the operating system. Okay, so the main thing we're going to be using here is os.path. Okay, os.path is an object that has path-related functions. We know what a path to a file is and a path to a directory, and so there's a lot of different functions associated with this object that allow us to manipulate paths. So why is this important? Well, it's important because different operating systems write paths differently. Okay, so here's some comments. The following specifies a path that can work on any operating system. Okay, so this is the part that specifies a path that can work on any operating system. Now the reason that's important is because this path on Linux, that is home, right? That's your home directory, and that could be anywhere. I don't know where everybody's home directory is. On my machine, that's /home/Luke. On the CS server, for you guys, that could be /u1/class/CS151, and then your 2 digits. That would be your home folder. So this means something different depending on what system you're on. And then on Windows, your home folder is something different. Like on my Windows machines, it's C, but they use backslashes in Windows to separate the folders instead of /. Okay, so the reason I'm not just using a string for the path here is because I want this program to work on any operating system. So this is the right way to do it if you're doing anything with paths and you want it to work on any system. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say path os.path.join, and I'm joining these components of the path. Okay, and in the end, depending on what system I'm on, if I'm on Linux, this whole expression results in this string if I'm on Linux. If I'm on Windows, it might result in this string, depending on what user is running it. Okay, so path is os.path is a OS is a library. Path is an object on that library that has multiple functions on it. One of it is joining components of a path. Okay, so path is just a string, and I'll print that out. Let's print that out, the result of calling os.path.join. And let's run Python 3. And this was called parse. Okay, and it joined these items together, and because we're on Linux, it used a /. That's correct. Now I want this tilde, however, I need that to expand to my actual home user. Okay, so what I'm going to say is up here, path equals os.path.expand user path. So whatever I provide as an argument, if at the beginning there's one of these tilde characters, it expands that into my user home directory. Okay, so now when I print out path, it should be the full path. There it is. Okay, now again, the reason I do this is in case I run this program on Windows. Right? I want it to work on any platform. Alright, so we have a path, and we are looking for this players file that we opened, or that we made on the desktop, right? So let's look at parse again, and we'll leave that print statement there, and we're going to open this file for reading. So we're going to read in. So we use the open function, and then the path to the file, and then we're opening it for reading. And then players CSV, we're going to say is equal to fin.read. That reads in the data from the file, then we close the file, fin.close. Alright, now let's print and see if we got the right data. So this is players CSV. Players CSV. Alright, we run it. Okay, this is the file, and then this is the contents of that file. So that looks like we've got the correct thing. So what we want to do is try to parse that data out and convert it into a more usable form, either a list of lists or a list of dictionaries or something like that. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to say previously we would have a list of people on the team, right? And for each one of these lines in player CSV, each one of these lines represents a player. Okay, so unparsed players. What we want this to be is a list of each and every one of the lines in this file. Okay, so let's go back to parse. Unparsed players, we're going to say players dot or underscore CSV. This is the raw string that we have. What's held in this file is just the string data that was in that particular file. This is not a list, it's just string data. I could call type on this and it would say it's a string. Alright, so I can call the split method on it. And if I split this over new lines, that's going to create a list. And this list is going to contain every single line in that file. And there will be no new line characters. So let's print this out. Let me run it. Okay, now we have a list. Each one of these items in the list represents a player, but we also have some of these that are empty. Okay, and that's okay, because what we're going to do is ignore those. Okay, so let's, we don't need this print statement anymore, so I'm going to comment that out. We don't need this print statement anymore, so I'm going to comment that out. And we'll just run it again. That's a little bit cleaner. Okay, this is our list that we're looking at. Now what I want to do is I have this team variable up here. right? Let's bring it down a little bit. This team variable. Now I want to add items to this team. Each one of my players, for the first time through, I'm going to represent as a list. Okay, so for each of these items in my list here of unparsed players, the first item is a string, but it's still got all these commas, right? What I want this to be is a list. And then I want to ignore this one, and I want to parse this as a list of items. So I'm going to split it over the comma. Then I'm going to ignore this one, and then parse that. Okay? So for unparsed player in, now notice this is singular because this is only going to represent one of them, and then unparsed players is my list of players, so this is plural. So for unparsed player in unparsed players, what I'm going to do is if unparsed player does not equal anything, then I'm going to ignore it. And also what I'm going to do, unparsed player, I'm going to strip off any white space before or after. I'm going to say unparsed player equals whatever it did, and then strip off any white space. So that's going to help me with if I had a bunch of spaces here at the end. Alright? So if unparsed player does not equal the empty string, then I'm going to do something. What am I going to do? I'm going to make a parsed player. I'm just going to call it player, and this is going to be unparsed player dot split over the comma character. Okay. So what this line is doing is if we have one of those lines that's empty, like when we look here, we see one of these lines is empty. Because we're checking to see if it's not empty, we only try to parse this. We only try to split it over the commas if it's not empty. If it is empty, we don't care about it and we're not going to do anything. Okay? If it's not empty, we try to parse that string by splitting it over the commas. And we can print out each one of those, player. But the main thing here is after we've parsed it, we're going to add it to our team list. So team.append player. Okay, so now each one of these we see is much more structured. This is what we did in the previous program. We had a list of lists. Okay, we'll look back here. This is a list of each individual line in the file. Right? So notice this isn't a list, this is just a string, and there's commas in this string. What we did is we took this string and split it over the commas, and that created this list. Now each one of these lists we want to add to our team list. Okay, that's what team.append does. Okay, so we don't need this print statement anymore, and we don't need this print statement anymore, and at the end, let's print out team and see if we have a list of lists. And sure enough, we see the double square bracket, the opening square brackets, right? So this first one means this entire thing is a list. What's the first item of the list? It's this other list. Okay, the second item of this list is this, the third item of this list. So this is good. We have a list of lists. So I can print out team, and I want the first player in the team, and I want to print out their first name. Andrew. So the first player in the list is this list. So that's index 0 for the larger team list. And then index 1 is going to be the second item in the list, Andrew. Okay, now what I want to do is add an additional player. Okay, so let's just add another player to the team. And we're going to add Darius Leonard. He's a linebacker. His number is 53, He's not injured. Team. Now notice here, for these numbers, I went ahead and made them strings. That's because when I write data to a file, the data that I have to write has to be a string. Okay, when we look at all of this data, the numbers here are strings. It's because we got the data from a file. Everything you get from a file is string data. Okay. Now, if we were actually doing this properly, we might want to go through and look for any numeric values and convert those to numbers, but we're not, these are Jersey numbers. We're not going to do anything mathematical or mathematical with them, so we can just leave them as strings. And then this false, we're not actually doing anything with this right now, so we don't need to convert that to a Boolean, but we could. Okay, so that's important. It's important to note that when you're reading and writing data from a file, it's always a string. Okay, so anyway, we're adding this new player, and we're going to say team.append player. Okay, so let's move this print statement down, and we'll print out the team again. And we're going to look at this new player. So this should be the guy at index 3. Alright, 1, 2, 3, and then here's our new player. Alright, so he's at index 3 because he's the 4th player. Indexing starts at 0. The first one is 0. The second one is 1. Right? So team square bracket 3 is referenced by index. It's referencing this entire list, this last list here. And then the 1 referenced by index is referencing an item within that list. Alright, now what I want to do is convert this data all the way back to string data and rewrite it to players.csv. Okay. So basically we can do the opposite of this split function. So I can join a list by a particular character. So if I want to go through my team members for player in team, player CSV, I'm going to make a variable that's going to contain that player information, not as a list, but I need it now to be back in the comma form. Right, back up like this because I'm going to write this to the file. So when I get done, I need to just have one string that I have to write back into the file. Okay, so the player, the comma separated value version of this player is going to use the comma character to join all of the items in this list. The list is the player. Okay, so let's go ahead and print this just so we see what's going on. First, let's print player. So remember, at this point in the code, team is a list of lists. Player is a well-formatted list that we can use in Python. That's the type. It's a list. It's a list of strings. Now what we're doing here is we're converting that list into one single string. And then we're going to print it out. We're going to print out player CSV. Okay, so here we go. We have one player, and that's as a list in Python. And then this is after we joined everything with commas. So this is the opposite of the split. Up here we did split over commas. Comma dot join is the opposite of that. Okay, so all of the items in the list are joined together with this delimiter. Alright, and then we print that player out. Alright, so we don't need these print statements anymore, so we'll comment them out. And what we want to do is, for each one of these players as a string, we want to create a string version so we have a list of the string versions of these players. And we can say string version of players dot append, and we're going to add player CSV. Okay, so this is an empty list, and we're adding to it the string versions that we just created. We can verify that by printing it out. So this should be a list of 3 items. Each one of those items is a string now. Instead of a list of lists, it's a list of strings. And sure enough, here is the first string. Here is the second. I'm sorry, it's 4 items now because we added that player. Right? And then here is the 4th string. Okay. Now what we need to do is take this list and join it by the new line character. Okay, so remember that was the first thing we did. So we're working in reverse. First we split over the new line character, and then for each one of those items we split over the comma character, and that gave us a list of lists. Now we're doing the opposite. We have to join them with the comma character, and now we have to join all of those with the new line character. So this is going to be our new file data. And we're going to say take the new line character as a delimiter and use it to join all of the items in this list. And that list is our string players. And now let's just print out new file data. Okay, so this now is just one big string. And this is exactly what we want to be saved in players.csv. Okay, so we don't need this print statement anymore. We can go ahead and leave that one, and now all we have to do is write this data to the file. And we know how to do that in 3 lines of code. Right, so this is our players.csv, and as soon as we write the new data, this should change, and we should see Darius Leonard in there, and also these new lines will have disappeared. All right. So let's try that, and then we'll be done. So parse, we're going to say fout, because we're opening a file for output. Open. We already know the path. We defined the path up here, os.path.join, and we expanded that tilde. Okay, so it's still the same path, but we want to open the file for writing this time instead of reading. Then we say fout.write. What do we want to write? We want to write this new file data. Okay, and then don't forget fout.close. Close your file. And that's it. So now we've successfully added a person to our players.csv list. Okay, so python3.parse. Alright, so it prints out this, and we should see that this file has changed. And sure enough, all the spaces went away, and now we have one of these players. Alright, now if I run it again, it should keep adding this player. Ideally, we'd want to look through and make sure that player doesn't already exist. Okay, but that's a little bit more complicated. But you get the idea. This is how almost all data is stored in computer science in some form or another, in some structure that is non-volatile. Right? Memory is volatile. As soon as the computer turns off, data goes away. So you need some way to store that data when the computer is off. And the simplest way is with a file. You can also use databases and different things like that, which essentially are files as well, but that goes into something else beyond the scope of this course. All right. So this is how you store data, and you'll be using this more than likely in your upcoming projects. Okay, so that is parsing data from a file. Very common in computer science.